What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Today we are talking about Tesla and mining. We've got an awesome guest, Rodney Hooper from RK Equity on the line. What's up, Rodney? Welcome to the show.
What up, Hyperchange? Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So you are an expert in lithium and sort of mining companies and stocks. Really curious to get sort of pick your brain today on Tesla's focus on this space, particularly with the lens of Battery Day. And what we just saw, Tesla making these crazy investments and basically getting the cost of batteries so cheap that the raw materials are actually becoming a big friction. And so they are moving into potentially mining themselves. They're going to have very important relationships in the mining industry to pull this off and build as many electric vehicles as they want. So today we're going to dive into all of that. And I'm really excited to have you on. So maybe before we get too much into the Tesla side, could you give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you do every day?
Sure. So, as you may have noticed, Gally, I'm not your age. I've been around a long time. South African, so mining is kind of in our blood. I have specialized in a number of areas. I ran a mining book, a proprietary mining book for a bank, quite a few years in the mid 2000s. And after that, got back into specializing in derivatives and funding quite a lot of mining projects and shareholdings within mining projects. And then about 5 years ago, my countryman looked like he pulled it off with Tesla. So I started to focus in on the electric vehicle battery metal side of things. And as I always like to say and laugh, I went down the lithium wormhole about 4 years ago, and I've never come back up. It's a highly nuanced and complex field that looks simple from the outside, but it absolutely isn't. And then a couple of years ago, after having studied the industry, deeply across mostly lithium, but all of the metals, I partnered up with Howard a couple of years ago. And what we do is we do advisory work. We sort of improve the profile of developing and junior electric vehicle battery metal companies. Our raison d'etre is North American and European supply chains. Those are the two areas that we focus on. That's the reason for our existence. And thankfully, Battery Day has reinforced that. We think localized supply chains are key. So we represent a number of lithium companies and more lately other EV battery metal companies that fall into the North American supply chain and the European. But we also focus clearly on their ability to one day produce at the lower end of the cost curve and also do it sustainably, because we think just being local is not enough. It needs to be clean. And so that's what we do. And we help them get profile, sometimes, assist them with meeting investors for funding. And then we also, given our experience and conversations across the industry, assist in negotiations with OEMs and battery cell makers and potentially project funders to actually get the projects built to make the change that everyone wants to see.
Awesome. So you're really on the front lines of the lithium and mining industry, talking to all these players, which is why I really wanted to have you on the show. And you made a point earlier there saying that, like, your countryman pulled it off, Elon Musk, and you're like, okay, Tesla's going to win, electric cars are the future. Like, I want to get involved in this industry because it's going to change mining. And even though we all have a smartphone, but we don't all have an electric car yet, the lithium industry has almost just as much been changed by those electric cars versus the smartphones because there's so many more raw materials in those cars. So I kind of wanted to dive into that part of Tesla almost single-handedly, at least in my Tesla world, I'm like, they're the only EV player. They're selling way more electric cars than pretty much anyone except for like BYD or some China players. So could you sort of quantify or help us understand, how much of an impact Tesla has had on this mining industry? Because I got to feel like them up to now 500,000 cars a year, like, are they kind of the gorilla in the room?
Absolutely. And, next year I'm sure you saw those numbers. It looks like they might even do over 500,000 just in China next year. So the
Yeah, I
thing,
saw that. I was like, I kind of believe it, honestly. I don't know. I was hyped. I put it in my newsletter. I was like, honestly, I think they might. They're
No,
definitely
no.
scheming
I
on it.
mean, look, they did just under 23,000 cars in 1 month in the Model 3 in China. So 300,000's on for next year. So I think, Gally, the thing that people need to understand is, and I keep explaining this, is battery technology is running out way ahead of the raw materials. And I highlighted this a while back, and I said the problem is when you go to first principles and solve the riddles of battery tech, you're dealing with science and you're dealing with incredibly smart people that can fail forward and move very quickly. When you deal in raw materials, you're not just dealing with the science of the raw materials, you're also dealing with permitting, the impacts of that. There's just so much more that goes into it. So, the thing is, Tesla, we talk about 500,000 units, but you also got to realize that the amount of battery raw materials that go into Tesla, which are pure EVs, it's not a plug-in hybrid, it's not the biggest selling car in China at the moment is that mini EV that's got a 9.8 kilowatt hour battery pack in it, or 13. A Model 3 has 65 or 70. The ones that are going to come out are going to be all bigger. So from a raw materials perspective, Tesla is huge. From a lithium perspective in hydroxide, it's enormous. And nickel coming up. So in the end, it won't matter as time moves along whether you do LFP or what have you. Ultimately, battery quality materials, whether it's lithium or what have you, is going to be strained. And I think because people need to understand the supply chain and internal combustion engines is very different from what you're asking for in the electric vehicle world. And the other thing as well is, if I was to say to you, well, what if we were to wake up tomorrow and internal combustion engines were only 3 to 4% of the world's fleet of cars? How seriously would you take finding oil? It would be all consuming. And yet people take this different attitude at 3 to 4% electric vehicles, and we're going to 50 and then 100. And people don't seem to get the sense of urgency.
Yeah, and what I think about a lot is Tesla scaling to 500,000. I mean, it seems like they've been vertically integrating, and they did the Gigafactory. Like they literally had to like build their own battery factory to get enough battery cells. I wonder, I see them scaling to 1 million units in 2021, potentially 1.5 million, 2 million in 2022. I'm really curious where you start to think the friction, if any, in the material supply chain will be the dampener on that growth. Because in my head, I'm like, okay, Albemarle and all these big people, like Tesla can just stretch its supply chain a little. But I wonder, that's where I wanted to have you on, is like, I have no idea on how much, they've been stretching it from 0 to 500,000, but so where does that stretch get tough? And I can tell they know it's going to stretch, which is why Elon's on the conference call like, bro, let's get the nickel going. And we're going to buy this mine and do clay, because they can already feel that, like you said, the technology is way ahead of the trucks of stuff, of the purified sand and rocks that need to get there for those machines to, run through.
So it is, and you've hit the nail on the head there, Gally. So the whole battery day and the whole thing with the 4680 cell and where they can take costs, the runway for EVs to be price competitive or cheaper than internal combustion engine, the route's already laid out. The problem now is actually getting the production lines for the physical vehicles up and running. And of course, Tesla's done the casting machine and then the raw materials. But you raised an important point earlier is, and I keep saying this and I'll keep doing it till I'm blue in the face, you cannot get to $60 to $80 kilowatt hour battery pack costs without controlling the raw material input costs. You
And
have to
yeah, and let's dive
either
into that.
vertically integrate it or mine it yourself. It is not possible to get to that price.
And I have a really fascinating tidbit to tie into this, which is Tesla, when they were negotiating with Panasonic, my understanding is they actually were so concerned about the liability of who would negotiate those raw material prices down the supply chain that they took on the burden of doing that themselves. They were like, nah, we're not going to let Panasonic just not care and let the lithium price float because they're going to pass it on to us. We're going to use our own battery materials supply chain contracts team to lock in contracts and place of pricing of these raw materials. Like people don't even realize this isn't even a team that GM has or that Ford has because they didn't even do this industry. So like you're saying, this is so much different than ICE. Like the amount of layers that Tesla's had to go through. So it's not like this is overnight they're getting into mining. This has been a natural evolution of their vertical integration and this sort of, battery skunkworks unit within Tesla.
And that's true, but don't kid yourself. VW and GM are getting procurement teas together. They definitely understand now that it's a sense of urgency. But the problem that you have ultimately, Gally, is reinvestment economics. There is a Mexican standoff between the Albemarles and the Livents of this world with Tesla, because and I keep saying this, you've got to be very careful as an OEM. Are you playing checkers or are you playing chess? Because if you're shooting for the lowest possible price right now, you're playing checkers. Because you're not giving the lithium producers enough operating margin to expand their production to supply you tomorrow. If you leave them,
Wow. So the
if you
capex, basically, you're saying, like you need to
yes,
give.
and it's very expensive.
Gotcha. And so that's the kind of game of chicken is they don't want to do the capex because GM and Ford don't want to commit to this mega contract. So they're like, okay, well, we're not going to build a new mine. And then it's just kind of this.
So it's the trade-off here. But what you need is you cannot risk at 3 to 4% EV penetration already having a problem with raw materials. But I'm afraid in lithium hydroxide, I believe by the middle of next year, the market's going to be tight, especially if Tesla is going to hit 1 million units. So I understand why OEMs are reluctant
Can you
because
break that down a little bit more though? Because now you're piquing my interest. You're like 1 million units could be tough with this. So now this is where I'm like, okay, well, let's unpack this.
Okay, so just as an example of the rate of growth that we're going, so you are going to have about 75,000 tons of lithium hydroxide used in batteries this year. Next year is going to jump to 125, and the year after that, 175. And when you talk about impurities in lithium hydroxide, they now don't talk in parts per million, they talk in parts per billion. They want very pure material. And it's very difficult to produce. So there is a cost curve out there. So I'm saying I understand the dilemma for OEMs because one thing that people keep talking about is EV and ICE price parity. So it might be possible to have parity when the price of a battery pack drops to 100 kilowatt hours. But the OEM doesn't earn operating margin parity at that point. Because right now, OEMs sell you a cheap car, but they get the after sales servicing and the parts, which you won't get with an EV. They've either got to do accessories or do software as a service or autonomous or what have you. And that's a way off. So it's difficult. So the OEMs are fighting for margin because on the upper end, where you should make a lot of money in luxury cars, you don't make as much on an EV.
Yeah, and that's why I almost don't even take them seriously because you keep saying I'm like it's going to be Amazon, the people with unlimited super cheap cost of capital that want to go EVs with a clean slate are the only people I'm even taking seriously. Like GM and Ford they're going to die before we even like their
Well, the
contract
one
with
thing
Albemarle gets done.
Gally, the one thing I did raise my eyes at is when I looked at the GM Hummer when they showed the standard model will come out in spring of 2024. I mean, that's too late.
Dude, like I can't believe and then like the people even take it seriously is ridiculous to me. I'm like, dude, it comes out 3 years after the Cybertruck for triple the price with half the spec. I don't know. But it's interesting because I feel like Tesla is really the only one with enough vision and now enough capital to really push this industry forward and actually at the boardroom level have a CEO who wants to go all out and put the billions in, which is just what it takes. And
But also they've done it brilliantly. So, and again, this is the whole thing of, do you have a closed mentality or do you have a growth mentality? Tesla is growth. Everyone said, oh, production hell, they failed, they can't do it. 3 years later, they got a casting machine and they're taking everyone to the cleaners. So, it's interesting how people thought because they fail once, they're done. That's not how it works. That's not the West Coast mentality. They're moving quicker. And now they're doing cell technology, they're doing casting, they're doing everything all at once to get the car competitive. And it's very hard from a closed mentality with people who are trying to defend a dividend or cover a pension liability or something else to now suddenly not have the vision and the mindset to say we're doing this and we're going to risk it. So VW is trying to an extent, but I agree with you. The others have got some work to do. Although I'll be honest, I think GM's partnership with LG, that's a good partner to have, but obviously it's very difficult to spin your wheels and keep up with Tesla at the rate that they're going.
Totally. And so let's dive into this clay deposit that they talked about, because that seems like really piqued my interest. Is they mentioned as a joke to get into mining a while ago, and everyone thought it was ridiculous. And then they actually slipped this in at Battery Day. And the consensus is like, okay, we're basically going to find this clay technology that people have been dabbling with, but no one's really pulled off. But we're going to buy this clay deposit, we add salt, and we just process it and get lithium out in theory, a much easier and cheaper way. And the part that intrigued me is just this idea of localizing production, which you've been mentioning, like not shipping things around the world from a first principles basis allows you a lot more, R&D budget, a lot more automation, a lot more wiggle room on the cost of extraction because the cost of transportation is so low. So I don't know. I as a Tesla investor, I see so many industries where people are like, "Oh, Tesla's not going to do that. They're never going to do that." I think their engineering talent is 10 to 100 times better, not an exaggeration, than every other person or entity trying this lithium extraction. So Tesla's going to fail faster, try harder, and if anyone's going to do it and commercialize this, it's going to be Tesla. So I kind of, but maybe that's a naive approach of just assuming that,
I think that they are going to persevere and they have the capital to do it. But some pretty smart guys have had a crack at this, and again, there's timelines. You have to do permitting, you have to do what have you, because when you're in Nevada, it's the Bureau of Land Management land. You've got to get them to approve it. So in the interim, before they even, take Piedmont spodumene and produce their own hydroxide, say in Austin, or do the clay, there's a good few years window where they are going to have to buy from the Albemarle's, the Livents, etc. And there's no way around that. And you're talking 3 terawatt hours, Gally. They need everyone's lithium everywhere. That's an enormous demand just for them. That's bigger than what most of us had forecast for the whole world. So
and
I
what
agree with you. I wouldn't write them off, but it is going to take some doing. And remember, the grades within clay are very low. They're not the same as hard rock or brine, but it is, if you can do the salt extraction, it is a sustainable way of doing it. But it's a question of price. Other guys have had a look at it, and sulfuric acid has been the method of choice. But again, you've also got to think about Tesla is not trying to compete against the industry as the lowest cost producer. They're trying to reduce their cost of lithium and do it themselves. And I think some people get it a little bit wrong. They're not going to do it for $4,000 a ton or what have you, but if they can do it for 8 or 9, that's still cheaper than what they're going to pay.
Wow, fascinating. And so do you think these in that interim period, it feels like those suppliers have been able to expand with Tesla thus far, and I would assume they're a lot more bought in with Tesla than they were when they started that relationship, so they're more willing to go ahead and spend capex up front. I wonder what's your kind of status on the Albemarle's of the world's
So
relationship
Albemarle's
with Tesla?
already, they've said they're going to be flat production next year, and Livent is looking the same. They're not happy with the reinvestment rate. So they are going to hold back material, in my opinion, and we're going to see a price move until the price gets to the levels that they need. And
Wow,
it's a
because they're
tough
like,
one.
you guys were, it was too low, so they're gonna artificially restrict and pop the price as kind of a
Well, it's not
negotiation
artificial.
chess move.
You have a finite set of resource. If you sell it at uneconomic terms, then you become, you're not going to
Yeah.
go anywhere. They need to make a reinvestment economics, and they keep mentioning that. Albemarle mentioned it in their earnings call, and so did Livent, because Livent made 1 million. I think they made 1 million either negative or positive EBITDA for the last quarter. That's it. You can't build plants making that kind of money or not making that kind of money.
So it sounds like I'm trying to read in between the lines on what happens next. Like it sounds like you're almost saying there's like beef between
There is
these
beef, in
yeah.
my opinion,
So how
definitely.
yeah.
But it's understandable because someone's got to, the profit's got to sit with someone, and obviously OEMs are trying to make EVs profitable. Tesla is in a better position, and they understand if they can keep making cheaper vehicles and undercutting, they are the gorilla in the room. They're going to have a massive market share. So, the lithium companies are saying, if you want me to supply you in 2022 or 2023 and onwards and grow my production, you've got to give me enough money to spend. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Shareholders aren't going to approve it.
But wouldn't Tesla be a lot more willing than like GM to give them like a billion to spend because they have a million EV program versus GM who doesn't? So
Well,
so why is
this
you
is
know what I mean?
where
Like
it
why
gets
isn't Albemarle
interesting,
expanding just with Tesla? Screw everyone else, right? Like
because Tesla's got to pay them the reinvestment price, and the reinvestment price is not what Tesla wants to pay.
interesting. And how much of this is public? How much of this is you reading between the lines?
It's us reading between the lines, but in a market, in an EV market that's going to grow from 2.5 million this year or 2.4 to 4 million next year, and Albemarle's not expanding production, and neither is Livent. So they're telling you where they're at. They're not going to sell at poor economics because it's not going to work and shareholders won't support it. So I'm saying Tesla can get to the point of producing its own material, but it's never going to produce even a fraction of what it needs. So it needs the industry to grow. There are opportunities like direct lithium extraction and things like that, new techniques, the same that salt and clay would be, that hold opportunities. But the economics of those projects are still the same, that you need a fairly elevated price. And in our opinion, incentive pricing is $12,000 a ton or more. And in South Korea and Japan, that's kind of where the price is at. And I think that'll be where the price will be at next year. And then as we get to the middle of next year, and if Tesla sells all these cars, there are a lot of battery plants, as you know, about to be built by Tesla and in Europe, enormous amount of plants, and China. So there are going to be an enormous amount of competitive forces. I don't know, if we sell 3.75 to 4 million EVs, where are we going to in 2022? I don't know, 5 or 6, maybe 50%, maybe not quite that much, 5.5. We're at 2.5 now. Do the maths on the raw materials. You can't have guys producing flat. That doesn't work.
Hmm. Yeah, and so help me like go work through my devil's advocate skepticism because as long as I've been following Tesla, like I'm just so out of my depth on mining. You know what I mean? Like I just know Tesla's production and their cars are awesome, but and it keeps scaling. And I always hear the skeptics saying the supply chain will break. There's not enough this. The price is going to rocket. But like we never see the price of lithium like kind of compound at the rate of electric vehicle growth almost or like why have the people who always say the supply chain will break, why do they keep being wrong and it hasn't broken,
So,
you know?
what happened was in 2019 you had China cut subsidies on their EVs. So they're moving more to subsidizing the sort of charging infrastructure and that kind of thing. So you had an under demand in China last year. It came up short from what expectations were. You saw less demand. You also saw all of the Europeans stall the sale of EVs until this year because they only had the severe CO2 penalties this year. So they've deferred all of their sales into January and this year. Then we had Corona. So what should have been a big year has now stalled a little bit. But what I'm saying to you is the stars are aligned with the carrot and stick that Europe's offering between CO2 penalties and buyer subsidies. As you know, you can get like 9,000 euro, like $10,000 on an EV as long as it's not above a certain price. And they're heavy penalties. So we're now finally seeing EVs live up to this, the sales potential that they were. Now I'm saying to you, looking at what we came from was a moderate sort of minor oversupply. We're about to, in my opinion, have an undersupply in hydroxide next year and then a structural deficit from 2022. So I think we're about to see prices move because people are building battery plants
Yeah, and the question
all
is,
over, and they need the raw material.
does those pricing moves, like, is that enough of a friction to impact this cost curve that Tesla's on? Like, their gross margins keeps going up, they're compressing all their costs. Like, I wonder, as a Tesla investor, how much sensitivity do they have to this? Because I imagine they're baking in a good amount. Like, they're seeing that too, and they're like, that's why they're not even going to the table with Albemarle, because they're like, they don't think we can wait it out to 10K, but we will. And then somebody else will come online and we'll do it with them, not Albemarle. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Tesla's got a side
Yeah,
too,
you see,
right?
here's where the trick comes in, Gally. There are only three major companies that are qualified to supply battery quality hydroxide in the world. There are other smaller suppliers, but there are three guys that dominate it. It's Albemarle, it's Livent, and it's Ganfeng. So if they aren't making the moves, Ganfeng is to some extent, but if they aren't making, two of three are saying we don't like the economics. Ganfeng's got a plant coming online now in the fourth quarter. So, but Tesla is making a lot of moves in all sorts of places. So the 4680 brings you a whole lot of economics without changing any of the raw material prices. It brings improvement. The casting machine brings improvement on its own. So there are a lot of things that they do, plus they get the credits or what have you. But I believe, given the sort of pinch point in the supply chain, and I feel it anyway, because OEMs aren't making a margin, it's going to be the upper end, the higher valued auto segments that are going to switch to EVs first. And it's going to take a little longer to get to the mid and lower segment.
And it's interesting how Tesla's increasing margin in just the ability to manufacture all this stuff and have the better battery technology gives them more wiggle room at the supply chain level for raw materials contracts that other OEMs don't have. So it's fascinating how
Absolutely.
this tech advantage really goes all the way down to this, and that's what gives Tesla the wiggle room they need in this crazy mining industry.
And now, as you've seen, they're shifting to China, where they have three shifts going and where they can produce for quite a bit less.
Yeah, and
They,
what I think is fascinating is the exportation of vehicles from China, which they totally said wasn't going to happen and sandbagged, and then like the second that like it's happening way sooner than I would have expected, and it looks like they're really tripling down on that. Which, as a shareholder, I'm like, this is genius. It's like Apple Foxconn, but we're vertically integrated. Like this is going to crush it. But yeah, that kind of caught me by surprise too.
and it's a smart move. Apparently, I mean, I stand corrected, but I think the cost of production in China is 30-40% less, something like that.
Oh, and if you're like going to ship it to Australia anyway, it's like, well, it's way more expensive to ship from the US. So totally. And on that, what I always thought was fascinating is the cathode. This idea that we're like sending all of the cathode stuff to get processed in China, or like this kind of like one atom of rock goes around the world like 800 times, or not eight, like three times really. But it's just crazy. And so back to the localizing thing, the part we didn't talk about was the cathode part of that. Is that something you've looked at all? That's another thing that's way out of my depth, but I love the vision of raw materials on site with cathode on site to about.
Yeah, so when you do something, Tesla needs the nickel and the cobalt and the lithium and aluminium or whatever they're going to go with in their cathode. It's helpful to do it. This is why we are so pro, and this is why we are supportive and represent companies in North America and in Europe, because as Tesla showed up on its map with its cathode, it's going to look for the lithium and the nickel within a localized supply chain. They want to reduce the distances it does. We're hoping that they're going to do that in graphite as well. We've identified a good play in Canada because graphite's bulky. You actually have 1.2 kilos effective graphite in the anode. So, it's important, for them to do it. We think it makes sense. And, they're also looking to improve. They're also looking to improve the processing of, say, for example, nickel. They're looking to cut out of quite a few steps for what is traditionally the process for the stainless steel industry. So these things are going to help, even if they sort of source them and localize. They're probably going to get some economies of scale. But we think, if you look at what's coming in Europe, the European raw material, the Raw Material Alliance is already saying, I think they want 80% of lithium sourced by 2025 in Europe. That's too ambitious. They're probably going to have to get it from other places and locally. But it makes sense for Tesla to look for local partners to source, and I'll be interested to see if they do the cathode as well on site in Europe in time.
And I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a lot here, but I got so many questions. One thing I'm curious about is Boring Company and mining. Is that something you think about at all? Because I don't know, the way Elon is such a visionary, the way they've electrified the drilling machine, uh, is that, Tesla getting into mining with the Boring Company? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say, and if you think about it, what does Tesla do best? It's not mining. They don't do mining. And mining comes with inherent risks. You have all sorts of rehabilitation risk, environmental risk. They have said they want to leave. I think they want to, when he says mining, I think clay is about as far as you're talking, because that has a very small, or potentially less risk and a smaller footprint, to do. I think clearly with the Piedmont transaction, they're letting Piedmont do the mining and deliver the spodumene concentrate. They'll do the chemical processing. I think they have something to add at that level. At the mining level, I can't see it. Same with nickel. Again, we've identified what we think is the only play in America to do the supplying, and they'll take a concentrate from them and then do the processing from once they have the concentrate.
And do you, is it,
Getting someone, it's like asking a neurosurgeon to come, carve your meat. I mean, it's too much skill in it. It's not what they do best. They can add a lot more value, improving the battery, the casting, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. And one thing I always think about is this idea of autonomous vehicles of, can we reduce the amount of hardware? And that's like, this is an idea I think a lot about. Like, I'm invested in Arcimoto, the company that has like seats two people. Like, they have a higher MPGE than a Tesla just because it's not built. Like, I drive my Tesla around all the time. It's usually just me. And I'm like, the battery could be 1/4 of the size and have 300 miles of range if it was a one person vehicle. So I think there's a huge efficiency in natural resources to be gained by rethinking the form factor of the vehicle. And with vehicles becoming autonomous, like, this is the total other end of the spectrum that I think is like, yeah, like, why are we like digging up all these rocks? If we can figure out a way to dig up less rocks out of the ground, that's the first thing we should be scheming on, not like better ways to dig up the rocks. And so that's why if cars, yeah, you want to jump in?
No. So, I mean, if you think about it, recycling to some extent is going to help on that front. Second life
Oh,
of batteries,
yeah,
you know,
that the idea that once we mine it all and then it just stays in the system. Is that how real is that? Because that just seems too good to be true every time I hear that. But I got like some interesting tidbits of like at Tesla events talking to Tesla people, and they're like, give me a crew, and they're like, Gally, like, it's gonna be cheaper and way easier to just get the like all those materials we need out of an old battery pack than mining it. Like, once there's enough of those packs, and so that ever since I heard that, I'm like, like, there's
it is, but you're asking also to build million-mile batteries. But what you can at the end of life of a car is use that for stationary storage. If you think about it, if a cell runs down to below 80% capacity or 70, you can use it in a forklift, in a storage or something where the performance doesn't matter as much. And then once that's done, you can then recover. Urban mining, you do the batteries, but it depends on recovery rates, it depends on economics, but you're right. That's the ideal, is to recycle that material and use it again. As far as the autonomous, the thing is, as they say, with your kids, if you want to change the world, why don't you start by cleaning your room? So, the issue with the form factor or changing it is, everyone wants to save the world, but SUVs have become more popular than anything over the last few years, and they're big and bulky. Do you need a 4x4 to drive your children on the pavement to school? No, you don't, but people buy them. So, in Europe, nearly 42% of vehicles sold are SUVs or crossovers, and they're not needed in Europe. So, I think that's just anecdotally, that's probably why the Model Y is going to do phenomenally well, because the Model 3 is in the mid-size category in Europe, and that's got a 6% market share. And SUVs like the Model Y have a 42%. But
Yeah, but
people
it,
aren't
it
going
feels like
to utility.
idiocracy to me. Like I read an article today that there's like more space for parking spots in the US than people. And I totally believe it. Go to any town in the middle of the US, it's hideous. It's just parking spots. It's so ugly. So I'm like at some point like is I'm betting on education that people will be educated enough to figure out that it's just like I don't know, it just makes me really frustrated
I
that the
think
amount
something
of
that will be
resources
hugely
to
helpful, Gally,
yeah.
what will be hugely helpful is when people no longer have the charging infrastructure is substantial, that you have no longer have the fear of not being able to, so that if you're in an automated vehicle or you have a an app or what have you that sorts it out for you and there are chargers everywhere, that'll be a huge relief for people. What you've seen, China's been good with installing charging because that's kind of where they've shifted their subsidies. Europe is not there yet. Tesla is a fantastic network, but the other OEMs aren't. So people need to see that. Otherwise, everyone's going to want 700 miles of range and 10-minute recharging, and that's what they're going to want. So you need people to have comfort. I mean, I'm all for autonomous vehicles, but I think it's some way off for fully autonomous.
Yeah, for sure. So do you have any predictions on like looking ahead in your industry, in the mining industry? Are there any things like we should be watching for that you think a lot about?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I guess the difficulty, as I say, is we don't mining just doesn't move as quick as the battery tech. But yeah, I mean at the moment, to be honest, I can't think of anything. Obviously, if there's some kind of a breakthrough that we see in processing techniques, but guys, have been trying this for a while, so you've caught me a bit off guard there. I can't think of anything in particular. We
Gotcha.
might, I guess there's a fair question about battery tech, where that's going to go and what that means. Like solid state is, solid lithium metal anodes and that kind of thing. But again, producing and manufacturing is, as Elon says, the machine that makes the machine. It's very difficult to scale new technologies to commercial level. And one of the things I really enjoy seeing with Tesla is how they're refining as they go along. They're not going for the quantum leap, they're going for the refining. And that tells you, as Elon does, how tough it is to make the changes.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see if they can pull off the 4680 because the amount of innovation packed into that, the cell to structure, if they're right about that, then every other V without cell to structure will be just have like a huge disadvantage. I mean, it's that's one thing that I always think about is like the 100 gigawatt hour run rate in 2022 or amount. It just seems Tesla this is huge stuff. So now it's like I'm almost like grabbing the popcorn and like let's see what happens here, like the clay thing, like.
Well, I mean, if you're going to sell, if they hit 1 million cars next year, you can see why they need 100 gigawatt hours. And I guess from
Although
production
they've
hell,
said they don't need that till 2022, so like they're gonna hit 1 million without their own cells next year. Just to be
and
clear, I don't know.
which means that and they're also going to hit it without their own lithium and nickel and everything else. So it's going to look, nickel as a percentage of batteries is still low, but the right quality nickel in time is going to become an issue because it's phenomenal from an energy perspective. But as you know, with production hell a couple of years ago, and now look at the rate at which they are bringing on the new plants. They're ahead of timing. So I'm always scared to second guess Tesla these days because
Yeah.
they seem to do it. And you mentioned it earlier in terms of skills. The Universum does a survey of graduates, and they did a survey on engineering graduates
Yep.
in the US. And the number one company to work for is Tesla, and the number two is SpaceX. So anyone who thinks that Tesla is an auto company, you'll have to explain to me why engineers want to work for them rather than a SpaceX business.
Yep.
It tells you it's most definitely not just an auto company.
And that's and to me that's almost a beautiful place to end the discussion. Is that's my biggest takeaway from Battery Investor Day was Tesla has shined a spotlight on the mining industry with their Battery Skunkworks division and is putting billions of dollars and the world's smartest engineers at a problem that has not had that type of capital or that type of thinking in decades. And that's why my bet is that the coming 5 to 10 years will be unprecedented innovation in that space because of the capital and engineering that's flowing in today because of Tesla. And so I cannot wait. And as much as like, and I'm kind of curious because like you take a skeptical tone on a lot of like they're gonna have this, it's gonna be like that, but I'm like, it's not gonna matter. They're gonna like Tesla's selling 20, like they're gonna scale like hell. Maybe it's a little bit higher, maybe they have low cost 1 year, but this isn't gonna stop them. Like I don't see anything in the raw materials industry that stops this from becoming a 2, a 4, a $5 trillion company in 10 years. Maybe it takes them a longer, maybe margins 1 year hit a little. But from my Tesla brain perspective, I'm not seeing a red flag in the mining industry. I don't know. I'm like trying to figure out
No,
where I'm wrong,
and
you know?
I'm saying to you, I'm not. There's absolutely. I would never put my chips on the table against them in the mid and long term. I'm just saying in the immediate term, prepare yourself for some teething in terms of at the rate at which they're growing because, and it's by virtue of doing so well because they are outperforming on everything. As I said, they are outstripping on production, on battery tech, on everything. And you've always got to remember, is they are very aggressively scouring to source what they need. They're in a very competitive position. So if they are having any hiccups, you can be sure the rest of the OEMs are in for it
Yeah, and I'm
because
like,
they'll be behind
Albemarle,
them.
what's Albemarle worth? 12 billion? Tesla could buy Albemarle outright almost. Like it's getting so out of, I don't know. That's kind of a crazy idea, but like at
And
some
well,
point, right?
it's not because if you think about it, if they were to buy Albemarle and they effectively have their own in-house production, and that reduces the cost because if you take a net present value or calculate it, Albemarle produces at X, Y, or Z, it might come to the point that it's actually worth the transaction because you get what you need and you get it at the right price.
And honestly, Tesla's probably going to be spending 10 or whatever billion on lithium anyway, so they could do that. Imagine if Tesla gets a loan at like 0.0001%. They don't have to use
Yeah.
cash. They could just get debt securitized by Albemarle, separate it. Like they don't even have to spend cash to do that. They don't even have to dilute equity to buy Albemarle because I think they could raise
And
15 billion
sorry,
debt.
if we can go on one last thing, Gally, because
Yeah,
you're
no, I
hitting
love this.
where I'm not skeptical is exactly this, and I've raised this before. If you can have a low cost of capital and Tesla deploys it and actually does some kind of a physical streaming deal with all of these companies, be it nickel or graphite or lithium or what have you, where they assist the greenfield projects in getting funding at cheap funding, then that effectively means that those companies can sell to them for less or lock in a lower price. So there are clever ways of engineering lower prices, but you've got to assist because if you leave a junior on his own, most junior lithium companies fund at over 10%. That's what their funding rate is. They can't get funding.
Yeah, and
So
I love this idea. And if I was Tesla, that's what I'm waiting for them to negotiate is like 5 projects with these companies of like, we want all the output of this lithium mine that you've already validated that you just need a 2 billion to set up. Like we'll help you get that 2 bill and be the buyer. And then we lock in a lower price because I don't know.
exactly,
That's probably already
I'm
happening, but
saying you and I are on the same page in that front. But they'll never take all of your output because they'll never want to take the risk. But they'll take a third or whatever it is. But
okay.
the point being, I do believe that there is a place in which Tesla's low cost of capital and security of the supply can get them to negotiate a better position, but they're going to need to fund. There's no good just signing a piece of paper and leaving them to it. That makes it still very difficult sometimes for the juniors. So I'm with you on the longer term. I think they will tackle this. And I mean, I'm amazed. As I said, this failing forward and just improving all the time is exceptional. So I'd never back them to not do it. I'm saying in the near term, there needs to be a bit of give to let the incumbents who can produce the quality of material that they need a little bit of breathing room. And again, their nickel projects, that we see, that we think, again, on the basis of like an Albemarle, if you were to buy it or to lock it in, you could lock in a reasonable pricing that still gives them some breathing room to make money, because you're funding them or giving them, you're giving them the benefit of your really low cost of funding.
Totally. It's going to be fascinating to see how this all shakes out.
It is. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's people talk about, but in the end, look at, it's Tesla's really is the gorilla in the room in terms of quality and in terms of the scale in which they're moving, and and the satisfaction that people have. EVs are hugely popular. I know you bought one. You tell us, are you loving it?
Oh, I love my Tesla, and I'm so proud of the fact that I got to invest in a company that's only batteries, and that the biggest purchase ever, it like goes to Tesla funding the 4680 cell. I love it, and I'm never gonna buy a car that has oil. Like, to me, it's like such a dream come true, and I drove itself. Like, you're like, oh, I don't know about the autopilot, and I'm like, shit, I just drove to Seattle, San Francisco, and back 95% of the way was on autopilot. I don't even have FSD beta. Like, it's already changing my life of how I would drive. Like, I hate driving, but I love my Tesla drive. So, from a product perspective, I've totally like fallen in love with Tesla all over again. From a business perspective, I've always been an investor and loved it. But from a product, I love falling in love with it as a customer, because it's so incredible. Do you have one, or are you?
I do. In South Africa, we have load shedding, so you can barely charge anything. We don't have power. It's, at least at the moment, we do, but there's no charging infrastructure. They charge import duties and tariffs. We've got a way to go here, but yeah, as long as you don't drink that lightning bolt tequila while you put it on autopilot and let it drive for you.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna be safe. Well, thank you so much for joining the show. This was awesome, Rodney. I can't wait to see how this all shakes out. Maybe have you on again, catch up and see what's up after Tesla buys out Albemarle once they listen to this. And
so there are some moves that are going to come, and we can have a chat when they do.
Awesome. Well, have a great day. Seriously, thank you so much again. Peace out.
Fantastic. Take care.